Welcome, 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 my friends. Hello. Here I am. Here we are. Today's date, 25th of January 2023, here on the Bright Light Beings Facebook group for a live stream that we call Chat with Matt. Very happy to speak to any questions or requests or inspirations, prods, directives. Yeah, very happy to have a chat about what's going on and how you could potentially be a more accurate representation of the bright light that you be, a more expansive expression of your divinity, of your truth. All big words. They are big words, big concepts. Anywho, I was just having a look. No one's written anything in ahead of time, so I am at a loose end until someone inspires me. Maybe I'll take some inspiration from, because I really don't come on with any agenda, you know. This is a leap of faith for me to turn up and suggest that I'm going to talk for half an hour about something that I know nothing about to begin with. So let's have a look. Here is the poster that I shared. You probably can't read that, but that's me standing in Sanur, I believe. Yes, it is Sanur now, in Bali, out towards the mountains, the volcanoes actually, Mount Agung and Bromo, and those volcanoes out there at the rising sun across the lagoon in Sanur. I wrote, the empowered act of taking responsibility. Talk a lot about responsibility. It's a sticky subject for a lot of us. The empowered act of taking responsibility is not about accepting blame or shame for what has happened in the past, which is big, right? Because a lot of people sort of equate responsibility with this sort of blame, sort of accountability thing. And it definitely doesn't have to be that. But rather, choosing to consciously act, that's your responsibility. To choose to consciously act in the present moment in alignment with your intended future. Basically, I abbreviate that quite often and say your responsibility begins and ends with your intent, right? Because a lot of people get very hung up and paralyzed in many ways. They don't want to act because they're worried that someone else might take it in the wrong way, right? Or it might not have the outcome that would be pleasant. And that's a big problem, right? Because the truth is we can never be sure, because we can't control how any of our actions will be received by another, including the wider society and potentially, quote unquote, life itself, or the universe, or whatever you want to call that, God source universe. A lot of people get worried that they'll do the wrong thing and be judged, right, by the highest power that there be, or anything lower than that. They'll just be judged, right, as wrong, as getting it wrong, as making a mistake, as you know, being inadequate, not good enough. The truth is we can't avoid that. Others will judge us based on whether others want to judge us or not. Doesn't matter how skillful our actions might be. Doesn't matter how kind and caring we might be in how we deliver our actions and our thoughts and our words. Others are free to judge that from whatever interesting point of view they might hold, right? From whatever skewed perspective of the world that they might be subject to. We can't avoid that, you know. We cannot avoid that. So the point is, what was your intent in taking those actions or delivering those words? Where was your intention? Because that's what you do have control over. That's what you do have command over, where your intent lies. You don't have control over how it's received or even how it unfolds, right? Our intention was to successfully build a bridge, right? And the fact that we didn't manage to build a bridge successfully is not necessarily our quote-unquote fault. There are a lot of different things at play. We may not have been skilled enough to build the bridge. And that is something worth considering. But what was your intention? How were you aligned with love? Were you aligned with an expansive vision? Or were you trying to fool someone? Were you trying to rip someone off? Were you trying to elevate your status by achieving something that you're not capable of, right? Lots of things can look like you're trying to do the right thing, but your intention is not aligned with achieving the thing for loving reasons, right? Is your intent aligned with love, or is it aligned with sort of some fear-based narrative, fear-based, what's the right word? Entanglement. A lot of us act in ways that could be perceived as kind and caring, but we're doing it from fear, right? We're doing it from fear of rejection. We're doing it from fear of being judged as bad or wrong or not good enough. And that is still a fear-based action. Your intent was still to overcome fear, right? Which overcoming fear or negating your fears through acting against your fears is not actually a loving act. A lot of people think that love opposes fear. It does not. Love expands out of fear, right? Love doesn't associate itself with the fears. It doesn't worry about the fears, right? Fear worries about fear. That's the thing. Most people think, and it can even look like they're doing things in a loving, caring way, but they're doing it from fear, right? And that's not loving. So intent is very, very important. And responsibility is also incredibly powerful. If you're not willing to take responsibility, you ain't going to achieve nothing. That's the truth, right? Because until you are willing to take responsibility for your actions, you are not in command of your life, right? You are simply in a reactive entanglement, right? You are just reacting what is being presented to you as the right thing to do, basically the rules. You are acting as a robot. You are following the program. If you are not taking responsibility, you are basically living via the program of what you've been told to do. You're abdicating your responsibility to some other form of authority. This is very, very common in our society. We all do it to some degree, right? This taking responsibility is not yes or no. Right? We all take certain levels of responsibility, and we all have the capacity to take more responsibility for how we're showing up on the world. No one is 100% taking responsibility for themselves. Everyone has some degree of entanglement with this abdication of responsibility to various levels of authority, whether that be religious, whether that be social, whether that be intellectual, whether that be emotional entanglement in relationships, right? We're not fully doing what we feel to do from our heart. We're not taking responsibility for acting in full integrity with our heartfelt intent. There is all of us have room to expand in that direction. All of us have room to make improvement with how we take responsibility and how we access our deeper level of intuitive, intentional truth. So, that's the point, right? This is not right, wrong, good, bad, black, white. It is not. This is an evolutionary process of digging more deeply into aligning consciously with our consciousness, right? Choosing to intentionally get more clear, not necessarily intellectually clear, but energetically clear, to be a reflection of who we choose to be, who we're choosing to be, the beingness that we are embodying. It is a process, and it is not generally an easy process to navigate. It's not complicated, right? Taking responsibility for ourselves and choosing to do our best to maintain awareness around whether our intent is flowing through into our actions or whether our actions are being overly influenced by various programs that we still carry, whether those are desires or aversions created through traumatic experiences that we've had in the past, right? The desire to avoid pain, the aversion of things that we think will lead to pain based on our history, based on our experience, whether that be in this lifetime or deeper subconscious levels of stuff left over from other lifetimes, right? All of these influences are there, and we're all subject to them to some degree. And again, there's no completion to this process of expanding out of these disempowering influences. How we can navigate that is an ongoing process of expansion, and it requires practice, right? It requires us to practice maintaining awareness and choosing to maintain integrity around our intent, to take responsibility for living intentionally from our deeper guidance. And we have to do that with compassion, because we're all going to have moments, situations where we feel that we haven't done as good a job as we would have liked, right? We will all come to opportunity to judge ourselves harshly around our achievement of intentional living and taking responsibility for that intentional living. The problem with this concept of responsibility is it feels like we should be punished if we get it wrong, right? Or we should at least make amends. We should, what's that word? Not perjury, not, freak. No, I've lost it. Atonement. That's kind of the word. It wasn't the word I was looking for. I was looking for a word that starts with P that's similar. Purgatory, I think. Going to purgatory, right? We should all somehow pay for not being good enough at maintaining our intent, right? Because if we're taking responsibility for being intentional, then we have to bear the consequences of not being intentional. And somehow that's true, right? We have to, accept that there are consequences for not being intentional. But that's not a punishment handed down by some authority, right? That is just the natural energy mechanics of the fact that we are living from a program as opposed to living intentionally. And of course, that holds us back from being our most expansive expression of joy, which is the consequence, right? If we want to expand in our capacity to experience the joy of living, right? Living from love, expressing love, that's what joy is, right? The expression of love. If we want that, and we're choosing to be intentional about moving towards it, and we're taking responsibility for maintaining that intention, then the repercussion of taking that responsibility is becoming aware of when it's not as adequate or as expansive as we would like, and there is then we become aware of the consequence, right? Which is not an extra consequence for becoming responsible. It's no worse than it would have been if we were completely unaware and if we were not taking responsibility. But the point is, once you recognize it, then you have to digest it. And this is the double-edged sword of awareness, right? Until we have awareness, then we can't change anything. But with awareness comes the natural consequence of being aware is now we have to digest what we're aware of, right? Because when they say ignorance is bliss, this idea that if you're not aware of it, then it doesn't affect you. And that is true to a degree, right? To a degree. You don't have to intellectually process it. You don't have to reconcile it in your own intellect, and your own inner critic doesn't have to find reconciliation around the fact that you are aware of your shortcomings, right? You can be ignorant of your shortcomings and think that your shit doesn't stink, but your shit still does stink. You just are ignorant to that fact, and you think, therefore, everything's good, and therefore you are relatively happy in your ignorance. And again, this is playing out for all of us on different levels and layers, right? But the truth is, on an energetic level, see, the issue is we have to deal with this intellect and this inner critic. One of our responsibilities is maintaining an intent to slowly but surely expand out of allowing our inner critic to overly dominate, right? This egoic aspect of self that's always looking to be good enough. And it's difficult. Feels like I'm talking in circles a little bit, but hopefully I'm delivering something that's going to be beneficial to someone. If not just myself. I have said many times that this conversation that I have with my phone is just my own self therapy. It's like I'm talking to the friggin' mirror. It is a very weird experience. But anywho, it's one that I embrace because overall it's helpful for me and it feels purposeful for others. So maybe I'm deluded, which doesn't matter as long as I'm happy in the delusion. What really matters? It's my intent to be purposeful and helpful. That's the responsibility, right? Not my intent as to whether it's not my responsibility that anyone else receives it the way that I'm delivering it, because I'm not in control of that. So where did I get to? Completely lost now. I was hoping that someone would pipe up with some sort of question, but no one has, I think. But then again, no. Questions seem to be live. Hopefully I've come into the right place. Maybe I'll just refresh here and make sure that that is actually the truth. Bright Light Beings group. That's interesting. Maybe I'm not in the right place. Here's Michelle. Maybe I am. Yes, there I am. I am in the right place. Hi, Michelle. Yeah, I've been ranting for a good 10 minutes, or no, 15 minutes. Very happy for a prod. Very happy for some inspiration or a request question. So I've been talking about responsibility and intention. That's what I have been talking about. And allowing ourselves to find a more empowered relationship with this concept of both taking responsibility and being intentional, and finding compassion with our process, right? That it's not so easy to be intentional, and we have to take responsibility for our shortcomings, but not necessarily pay a price, like get punished. Just trying to dissociate this idea of taking responsibility and being accountable on a blame level, right? Yeah, we have to be accountable. I'm accountable for what I do, because who else can take account of what I do? But this accounting system, like the ledger of credits and debits, this is what accounting is. It's very, very black and white. Accountants get very upset if they're even just 1 cent out from balancing the books. And that concept can't really be applied to how we intentionally move through the world with our actions, because the rules are not so clear, right? This idea, accounting rules are very, very clear, right? Money spent, money received, very clear rules about how we account for the budget, for the incomings and outgoings, profit and loss. Very, very clear rules that can be applied, and we can have very exact answers, and we can know our profit to the cent. We should know our expenditure to the cent, and we should be able to account for where every cent went, right? Very clear rules that help us do that on this accountability, right? This ledger. But when we try and apply this same concept of accountability to our actions, it's impossible, because everyone's perceiving our actions from through their own filters, right? Their own perception of our actions. And while we are maintaining our intent about what we are trying to achieve, what we're intending to achieve by taking those actions, everyone else is receiving a different outcome. So some people will think you did good, and some people will think you did bad. Some people think you are terrible, and some people think you are awesome. And how do we account for that, right? And so do we think that if the majority of people think we've done the wrong thing, then we've done the wrong thing, right? Well, how do we balance this? How do we take accountability for our actions based on everyone having a different outlook on our actions? Do we go around and apologize to everyone who thought our actions were wrong? And do we go around and celebrate with everyone who thinks our actions were good, right? It would be crazy. It would be crazy. The point is, this accountability is a very internal thing rather than an external payment exchange idea. That you should atone for getting it wrong based on some perception that it was wrong. Whose perception are we going on? Your own perception that it was wrong? Or someone else's perception that it was wrong? Or some sort of concept of God's perception that it was wrong? Because God is not judgmental. That's the issue. I know we've been indoctrinated with a program that God is judgmental, and there's this set of rules, these commandments, that if we break those according to God's word, the Bible, or some other spiritual text, then we are judgeable, and that we will be punished in some other form, whether that be karma, if we talk about the sort of more of the Hindu concept, or whether that be, hell, if we talk about the Christian or subsects of Christian, belief system around heaven and hell and getting your reward in the afterlife for your good deeds or your punishment for your bad deeds according to some absolute judgment scale delivered and maintained by some higher authority, God, source, universe, lords of karma type arrangement. Trying to live that way is very disempowering. It's very stress-inducing, right? Because let's face it, no one wants to go to hell for eternity. That really sounds sucky. That really sounds a very average outcome. Eternity sounds like an awful long time, and hell isn't painted as a very nice place. So that would, that level of contraction around not wanting to get that wrong, keeps people in a severely disempowered space of not wanting to do anything that could be judgeable by anyone, right? And you just keep your head down and follow the rules, right? Rather than live your life as an expansive expression of the divine, right? No way, Jose, that's too risky. So, and in the karmic sort of idea, we don't want to do the wrong thing. It said, I know it was promoted to me that if you, go against the guru, that you're going to spend your next life as a worm. I don't know if worms have a terribly bad time, but apparently it seems like a bad karmic outcome to spend your next life as a worm. It certainly made a lot of people fearful that I knew at the time. So the point being is to kind of be willing to take responsibility for yourself and how you live intentionally in the world, how you access your heart and allow that to express out through your actions, right? That's your responsibility. And that doesn't necessarily come, this taking responsibility doesn't necessarily have to be such a risky thing that, if you break free from simply robotically following the rules that have been laid out for you. And let's face it, no one follows these rules very well from what I've seen. Even the most ardent religious follower doesn't seem to be able to follow the rules terribly well. And they spend a lot of time in confession, which is handy, right? As long as you just keep showing up and confessing your sins, then that sort of paying atonement by doing your rosary or your prayers or paying money to the church or any other thing that said authority hands out absolves you from your shortcomings, Re-establishing this idea of the ledger, this accountability idea that someone knows what you need to do in order to atone for, to account for the bad things that you do, the going against the rules, right? It's crazy, my friends. It's crazy, but it's so deeply indoctrinated in our society. Even those who, are not religious and, profess to be atheist or agnostic or whatever, right? Profess to be scientific and very rational in their thinking as opposed to religious in their thinking, still have a lot of this entanglement with accountability and responsibility and atonement and making things right and how we could possibly do that, which is, in my opinion, impossible, right? To it's impossible to please everyone. It's impossible to atone for your actions so that everyone is satisfied with what you are doing. Impossible to satisfy everyone, to please everyone. We have to find peace with the idea that people are going to, anyone is going to think that anything that you do is wrong. And you don't need to appease them. And you don't need to make them wrong for thinking that you're wrong. It's not that they're wrong. They're just acting from their programs, right? And their trauma and their history. The point is to get out of this idea of judgment around wrong and right. What is wrong and right? It is a very, very dynamic field of based on someone's perception, and someone's perception is changing. Your own perception is changing momentarily, right? What you think you did was right a moment ago, now you've just reassessed it and now you believe it was wrong. So do you now need to pay for what you thought you were doing right because now you think that it was wrong? Or do you go back to what was your intent in doing it? Were you deliberately trying to hurt someone? If so, yeah, it would probably help for you to somehow make amends to that person that for whatever reason you felt it was the right thing to do something that was damaging to them. Which is basically recognizing, taking responsibility that you acted out of your trauma. And to some degree, you have to have compassion with yourself and others. That acting out of trauma is a very real thing that happens all of the time to all of us to some level, right? We're all influenced by our past, and we can't get too hung up on taking responsibility for how we've been programmed in the past. Because what's your intent today? What's your real desire? Are you operating from love, or are you operating from fear? Are you operating from desire to be helpful, or are you operating from hatred and wanting to punish other people and defeat other people and take what other people have for yourself because you fear that there's not enough? Where are you at? Because ultimately, that is your responsibility to come to some level of awareness of what's driving you, what's influencing your actions, so that you can take actions in a way that's more conducive to being an expression of your truth rather than an expression of your pain. We all have pain, and it all influences us. It influences all of us to some degree. Our job is to take responsibility for slowly but surely improving that equation so that we become more intentional around operating from our heart and our truth, and less influenced by the pain and the trauma that we carry from the past. And at the same time, recognizing that pain and trauma is present and it is influencing us to some degree. We have to be compassionate with that, but we can also be intentional about how we are managing that. And there's no line in the sand. There's no absolute point of judgment as to whether we get it right or wrong, because there is no right and wrong. It's just an intentional thing. And no level of intention is a failure, and no level of intention is a success, right? There's not the right amount of intent. Oh, now you're being intentional. Before you were too wishy-washy, It's a difficult concept for the human brain that is so entangled or so contracted around this idea of success or failure, pass or fail, right or wrong, black and white. We've been so indoctrinated into this very polar way of looking at the world, this very digital conceptualization of something as either on or off and no in between. And you go out into nature and have a look. Nothing is absolute. There is definitely not a digital world out there. It is very, very analog. It is very, very dynamic. It's definitely not conclusional, and it is definitely not yes or no. Walk in a forest and see anything that indicates yes or no. It's, every aspect of everything is entangled and intertwined. There is no straight lines. There is no straight lines in nature. Everything is organic. Everything is intermingled. Everything is a bit of this and a bit of that. It's awesome. It's awesome in its non-conclusionality, if that's a word, non-conclusionality. It's awesome in its forgiveness, right? In its lack of clarity, almost, right? In its lack of absoluteness. There is such a freedom in getting out of this absoluteness of yes, no, good, bad, right, wrong, that is so supportive on a soul level, for us living an expansive life here, for us finding true deep acceptance of ourselves and being willing, brave enough, courageous enough to express ourselves authentically out there in the world. Hey, Brother Lou. This is the point. It's to break out of these programs that are so definitive, yes, no, right, wrong, and to embrace the true nature of life, which is non-conclusional, dynamic, flexible, adjustable, adaptable, forgiveness on so many different levels, right? Everything finds its way, outer space, collaborates together. You walk in the forest, look at the collaboration that's taking place. The fact that all of these trees and plants, all of their roots are entangled and intermeshed. No one is trying to kill the other one off. They're all choosing to find space within the spaces. And even on the trunks of trees, other life forms are growing, and mosses and things and fungi, and something dies and life sprouts from that death, and new things come up to fill the space in the canopy. It's an amazing symbiotic relationship of collaboration. There's no hoarding of the nutrients. There's competition in a way, I guess, but it's not from a space of lack and fear. It's from a space of joy and expansion, right? Things thrive and reach for the light, and other things, of course, are a little bit behind, but ultimately there's space for everything, and everything is acceptable as it is. And there's an amazing beauty there, despite the complete chaos, despite the fact that it's very hard to distinguish any real rules in the forest, right? Or if you think you find a rule, then you walk a little bit further and you find something that's broken that rule, right? There's this depth of chaotic sort of beauty that the human intellect sort of struggles to conceive, because we can't really understand it. We love the idea of simplified rules, because then if we follow the simplified rules, then we will not be labeled as wrong. And so if you give me some simple rules and I can follow them, then I can relax into knowing that I'm doing the right thing because I'm following the rules. Humans love that concept. That's why the human race has been so easily controlled for so long, because they're so scared of getting it wrong that if you give them some simple rules, they will follow them just to be right. They'd rather be right than happy. So give them simple rules that keep them disempowered, and they're happy in their righteousness because they're following the rules, but they're not expressing their truth. They're not expressing their soul. They're not expressing from their heart. And so this is what, now, today, you look at the kids, you look at the younger generations, they're coming up, they will not be confined by the rules anymore, because the energy that their souls are bringing in is just so determined to express themselves more authentically that they can't be molded into these rule-following robots as older generations have been to some degree, right? And so that's how we're moving forward. Lewis wrote, it's a magnetism expressed by the trees amongst all of them, all benefiting from the gravitational fields of the plasma energies. Yeah, that's one way of expressing it. I just like to think that it's a divine collaboration, but yeah. We can get more scientific. At the end of the day, human minds love to conceptualize things in ways I think Einstein was very revolutionary in the way that he was a scientific genius and yet so connected to the unexplainable divinity that expresses through all. I was just reading some of his stuff the other day, and I was just blown away with how spiritually tuned in he was, to the truth that he didn't understand a lot of stuff, and he wasn't supposed to understand it. It wasn't necessarily, while he strove to simplify things. Yeah, all plasma is energy without form, so you could call it the divine in and of itself, but I like to think divine is beyond even the concept of plasma. But yeah, as we live in this world of pseudo-physical objects, right? We believe these things are real. Plasma is one way of describing how the divine manifests itself into form and how that energy flows through in various levels of density to create fields of energy that then manifest themselves as what we call solid. What we call solid. It's all delusional at the end of the day. It is all just an expression of thought, or an expression of energy, or an expression of intent. It's a fascinating inquiry. It is true. And in some ways, it's very liberating to move beyond the inquiry. It's a valuable inquiry to have, and then a valuable experience to expand out of being contained or constrained by the inquiry and the understanding. This is, I think, the big part of our evolution, is to go beyond understanding, to go beyond description. Lewis said, as you mentioned the children being born today, I'm holding my grandson who really has a mind of his own at just 10 months old. Yeah, because the newer generations are coming in much more connected to their truth. And the veil of delusion that the incarnation process has relied on for a long time is becoming so thin at the moment, right? That we're not, the amnesic state that we go through to come into form, to have these experiences beyond what we know to be true based on our soul and our higher self, is getting so eroded at the moment that a lot of young people are very, very switched on to their soul truth. And of course there'll be an attempt to shut that down, and to some degree that attempt will be successful, right? As the ego starts to develop, as children become 2 and 3 and 4, they tend to want to conform again with the rules and what society is projecting at them. Our job is to create a society where we don't shut them down nearly as much as we have shut successive generations down, including ourselves, because we all came in with a degree of knowing. That's why always babies have been, held in such reverence, because you look into their eyes and you're looking into deep wisdom, because they have not yet developed an ego that shuts them down and identifies themselves as a separate being, and worries about being judged and rejected, etc., etc. Right? Babies have no concept of that, and so there's still a very open portal to the truth of the soul that they be, until their ego starts to shut that down out of self-preservation, right? Desire to live in the biological form successfully. Anyway, my friends, I think I've done my time, and I do have another call coming up. So, much love. Hey, Sister K. Much love to you all. Hopefully that was a useful conversation. It was a bit of a rant, bit of a monologue from me, especially for the first half, around intent and responsibility. So hopefully there's something. Everyone's piling on now. Did I get the time wrong? I'm pretty sure not. It's always 9 o'clock my time. Anyway, much love to you all, my friends. It's definitely worth watching the replay, in my opinion, and feedback to me what you thought. Any questions, any comments, any concerns, any complaints. Happy for complaints. Happy for any form of dialogue that furthers our ability to move forward, and that includes people complaining, right? Saying that they don't like what I did. That gives me pause for reflection and helps me dig deeper into my intent and what I was doing and how people are perceiving it and all of that, right? I'm not averse to being challenged at all, even though it does, create a level of discomfort for my ego. Of course it does, but there's I'm not here on this planet. None of us are here to appease our ego with comfort. We're here to expand out of being absorbed in the ego and to allow ourselves not to have to kill the ego, but to expand out of complete control by the ego so that we can utilize our ego in empowered ways and by finding a deeper connection with the truth of who we be. So getting challenged by others, being questioned, receiving complaints is a very powerful way of progressing, right? And it's not to be avoided, and I certainly don't want to avoid it. I deliver, because at the end of the day, my responsibility is to deliver from an intention to be of service, and that's my intent. But if I can take feedback and recognize how that intent is being received, then I can modify. Not necessarily, I don't change my intent. My intent is still to be of purpose, but I now have wisdom. I've gathered information that helps me take into account how other people can perceive what we're delivering. That's a valuable process. That's the process of evolution. That's why we have a critical mind, to see problems and then to take account of them. The problem is that we have become too problem-centric. It's important to be aware of the problems, the challenges, the pains, aware of it so that we can take account of it. But if we become entirely contracted around that to the point that we lose connection to our vision and our intention, then that's a problem. And that's where society is at the moment, right? Far too contracted around solving problems and avoiding pain and not connected enough to their vision of the future. We need to rebalance that, bring more vision of the future in, which doesn't mean denying problems or avoiding challenges or not wanting to hear criticism. Balance. Anyway, friends, much love. I'll be back again next week. Go well. Enjoy. Bye for now. Namaste.